Welcome back, everyone, one and all. Welcome back to the Hoplite channel. I am your host, Hop. As always, good to see you. Glad you're back. If you're here for the first time, welcome. Either way, you clicked on this video because you wanted to see Norse literature, the Saga of King Hrolf Kraki, Part 1. So I want to say thanks again for everybody who tuned in to watch the three-part series on the Prose Edda. I hope you found that entertaining. So when you were reading all those go-bys of the myths and the gods and whatnot, I hand typed all those out. And I just realized like how tedious that undertaking was. But we got an hour-long video out of it, so I hope you enjoyed the third part of Prose Edda as much as I did making it. Anyway, we're moving away from the myths of Norse mythology as it pertains to the gods and the supernatural in certain respects. There'll still be some supernatural goings-on in the next few readings, but we're dealing now with more of the hero sagas. These are the stories of Norse mythology that inspired the poems and the songs and the stories about valiant kings, right? About proud warriors who undertook fantastic feats, committed incredible deeds to memory for the rest of history to look upon and to draw inspiration from these seemingly ordinary men who were capable of extraordinary things. And one of them is King Hrolf Kraki. And we begin with this saga. So let's get a little backstory as to where this mythological series of stories comes from. And yeah, we'll jump into this, some of the readings here for part one. But yeah, let's talk about the saga of Hrolf Kraki as it exists as a piece of literature. We know that it was written sometime in the 14th century AD in Iceland, but we don't know who wrote it. It's anonymous, right? We know it's not Snorri Sturluson, correct? Because we know Snorri wrote the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, but he would have died quite a while before the 14th century came around, probably by about either 75 or 100 years. So it wasn't Snorri. Who it was is up to debate, but yeah, we know it was written because it was found in Iceland around this time. And we know that it is one of many fronaldars, which are legendary sagas of the pre-Viking age. So these are stories that Vikings would look back to during in their time as inspiration of the days of the forefathers, right? The days when men were men and women were women, and trolls and gods and frost giants walked the earth, and it was like the pre-Viking ancient time of great myth and magic. And we know that King Hrolfi was a king in this pre-Viking age. Whether or not he was a real person, again, is up to debate. I don't think there's any conclusive evidence to say that there was a actual King Hrolf Kraki, although it may have been a story told about an individual king who had these qualities, and they made him up into this legend similar to King Arthur. We know that King Hrolf Kraki, the name Kraki actually means tall and slender. And the story goes that King Hrolf Kraki was in his court one day, and a young boy came into the court to seek out the king, and he asked where the king was. And King Hrolf is talking to the kid and saying, well, look no further, I am he. And the kid being, just, a smart ass and saying what first came to his mind, he said, oh, I didn't know I was talking to the king. I thought I was talking to a slender pole because he was so skinny. So the story goes that Hrolf Kraki actually laughed at this and decided to give himself the pseudonym Kraki after this kid called him a slender pole. So he became King Hrolf Kraki instead of just King Hrolf. So that's where the name allegedly comes from. And we know he was a 6th century Danish king. And as we read in these myths, I want you to pay attention to some of the similarities we see between the Icelandic saga of Norse mythology juxtaposed against the Anglo-Saxon poems and stories such as Beowulf, and also the Arthurian legend of King Arthur and his knights, and some of the similarities we see with Christianity, and how Christianity and Anglo-Saxon culture derived much from the Icelandic and Scandinavian culture as well. Because King Hrolf, we see that there is a character in Beowulf, and his name is King Hrothgar, right? So we have King Hrolf, and we have a King Hrothgar. And King Hrothgar is also a pre-Viking age Danish king. And he calls upon a hero who we later know to become the mythical and incredible Beowulf, right? One of the greatest heroes of all time, especially in the Anglo-Saxon tradition. And Beowulf, the Beowulf, or the Beowulf, depending on how you want to take the translation. We find that one of King Hrolf Kraki's berserkers, and his most famous warrior, is a man by the name of Bodvar Bjarki. And Bodvar Bjarki means little bear. Bodvar means to go to battle. So the battle bear, right? We learn that Bodvar Bjarki is this man who is a berserker and can manifest the form of a belligerent bear that can't be killed with stones or swords or arrows. He can go into a state of metamorphosis when he goes into a berserker rage and take on the form of a bear. Pretty mythical, pretty badass. So yeah, we have Beowulf, and then we have Bodvar Bjarki. And they are two heroes who either are allied with or work for King Hrolf, King Hrothgar, Danish king, pre-Viking age, you get it. Okay, getting back to the saga of King Hrolf Kraki itself, we know there are 4 parts. And the first part deals with his ancestors, Kraki's ancestors, then his parentage, his immediate parents, next his champions, and I mentioned one, Bodvar Bjarki, and then lastly we learn of Bjorn's tale. And Bjorn actually travels to Norway, and the story of Bjorn is more in line with actual Scandinavian history, because as we know, Bjorn Ironside, who potentially was the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, becomes the first king of Sweden. But this is Bjorn's tale. And towards the end of the Champions and into the 4th book, King Hrolf Kraki doesn't really have much of a role. I mean, he's in there, but he almost kind of steps aside and lets the other actors and characters take over the stories. But anyway, for this first part, we'll look into Hrolf Kraki's ancestors, and that's a sordid mess. That's like a Norse soap opera. And then we'll talk about his parentage and the champions for part 2. But we know that Kraki was a skjoldung, and a skjoldung was a member of an ancient Scandinavian dynasty. So in the pre-Viking age, to be among the skjoldung house, that family, that was a big deal. That was one of the main Scandinavian dynasties and kingships in that age. And we know that there is a telling of the saga of the skjoldungs, and that this saga inspired Snorri Sturluson's Edda. So a lot of the myths and stories in the saga of the skjoldungs, of which Hrolf Kraki was a member, inspired Sturluson's Edda. So we have that link between Hrolf Kraki and the prose Edda. So again, we have Icelandic paganism, which would be Snorri's Edda and the Hrolf Kraki myth. And then this moves into our Anglo-Saxon myths of Beowulf and the Arthurian legend. And then we move into the stories of Christianity. And in particular, I'll talk about one story here we're going to cover that may sound familiar to you as you hear it. In any event, let's fill the Viking horn, shall we? And for this series, I was going to do it right this time, and I was going to break out some homemade mead, right? Because, Vikings didn't drink Coca-Cola. They drank mead. And you weren't a Viking unless you had your own homemade stash of mead. So here we go. Hopefully I make it to the end of this. All right, cheers. Skål. Oh boy. Okay, so to cover the ancestors, I'm going to put up a flow chart that I drew with my fantastic 6th grade handwriting skills. Not as good as this, But I'll talk about the lineage, the ancestry of Hrolf Kraki. Then when we jump into the readings, the individuals' names you hear will make more sense as you hear the stories. So anyway, we begin here with two brothers, and we see there is King Frodi and there is King Halfdan. And King Frodi is basically the alpha type. He's the jerk. He's the aggressive one. And you find out King Halfdan is more the beta, mild-mannered guy, easygoing. You know, he's a nice guy. He's dependable. So King Frodi doesn't really care for his brother Halfdan, doesn't want to share power, doesn't want to deal with anymore. So he sets out to conspire to kill him. And we see Halfdan has a wife named Sigrid. And as you can see from the spooky red skull and crossbones, these two folks die. Sigrid dies a little bit later. But we find out that Halfdan is murdered by Frodi. But before he's murdered, Halfdan and Sigrid have 3 children. 2 sons, Helgi, Hroar, and Signy, as you can see there. The daughter Signy marries a man who is a Jarl, and he is Jarl Seville. So Helgi and Hroar actually flee and have to grow up hiding in the countryside from Frodi, because Frodi is afraid, obviously, that his nephews, Halfdan's children, his sons, will seek revenge, which they do. So we find out later that Frodi is lured to the hall of Jarl Seville, and Helgi and Hroar spring a trap for him, and they kill Frodi with Jarl Seville's help. So the nephews kill their uncle, right? And their sister, Signy, is married to Jarl Seville. And then these 3 siblings take over next. So Helgi and Hroar become kings in their own right. And Signy and Jarl Seville have a son, and he becomes Jarl Hrok. So Helgi is just like Frodi was. He's type A, he's a jerk, he's an a-hole. He takes what he wants and doesn't care who he offends. King Hroar, his brother, is more mild-mannered the way Halfdan was. So what do we find out? Jarl Hrok becomes jealous of King Hroar and doesn't care for the fact that he has this wealth, and in particular this magical and treasured item, which I'll read from in a second here. And King Hroar is killed by his nephew, Jarl Hrok. Does that sound familiar? Some guy gets killed by his nephew. It seems to be a common thread here. But before King Hroar dies, he and his wife, King Ogn, have a son, Agner. And you don't hear much about him. And I don't know if that's supposed to be an allusion to Ragnar Lothbrok, because as you see, Ragnar, pretty close. And in the telling of Agner, he is considered to be a very good man, upstanding, well-regarded, just like his father Hroar. But in any event, we move over to King Helgi, right? Helgi has a wife named Queen Olaf, and we'll read the story of how those 2 lovebirds met. And they have a daughter named Yrsa. But King Helgi, for some reason, is smitten with his daughter. And King Helgi has relations with Yrsa, his daughter, and the product of that, of that incest is our hero, the main character here, King Hrolf Kraki, as you can see underlined at the bottom. So that's how we got to King Hrolf Kraki. And we'll read now from some of the myths surrounding this family. And I will provide the go along, as you can always find me doing, to read with me. So we jump to page 11. This is under King Helgi rules Denmark and King Hroar marries. It begins, there was a king named Nordri. He ruled parts of England. His daughter was named Ogn. Hroar spent many years with King Nordri and commanded the defense of the realm. Hroar was a trusted supporter of the king, and a deep friendship grew between the 2 men. After a time, Hroar married Ogn and settled there in the kingdom with King Nordri, his father-in-law. Helgi ruled over Denmark, controlling the inheritance from their father. Jarl and Signy ruled their own lands. Their son was named Hrolf. In Denmark, King Helgi, the son of Halfdan, was unmarried. Regin now took sick and died. It was regarded a great loss because he was such a loved man. Okay, so as we see in the first series, the brothers Frodi and Halfdan, Frodi had no children, and it says here at the onset here, King Helgi had no children either. And Frodi and Helgi were both the alpha, A-type jerks. Halfdan was, the beta. He was weaker. He was nicer. He was kinder. So was Hroar, and they had children. And we begin seeing how that this second generation is going to go. And this man, Regin, actually was one of their adopted family members who helped them overthrow and kill King Frodi. Okay, next let's move to the segment King Helgi attempts to marry Queen Olaf. It's also on page 11. At that time, a queen named Olaf ruled over Saxland. Like a warrior king, she dressed in a coat of mail, carried sword and shield, and wore a helmet. This was her nature, beautiful in looks, yet cruel and arrogant in temperament. Those who knew about such matters said that Olaf was the best match in all the northern countries, but she had no intention of marrying any man. King Helgi heard about the proud queen. It seemed to him that marrying the woman, whether she was willing or not, would increase his fame and importance. So one day he set off with a large company of armed men, and without warning he landed in the country ruled by the powerful Queen Olaf. Helgi sent messengers to her hall, requesting that the queen be informed that he expected a feast to be prepared for him and his company. His messengers transmitted the request of the queen, who was taken by surprise and had no chance to gather her forces. Making the best of the situation, she invited King Helgi to a feast along with all his following. Helgi arrived at the feast and had himself placed in the high seat beside the queen. The two drank together throughout the evening. Nothing was lacking, and Queen Olaf showed no sign of displeasure. King Helgi said to the queen, "The situation is this. I want us to drink to our marriage this evening. There are enough people here for such a celebration, and tonight we will share one bed." She answered, "It seems to me that this plan has moved too fast. Yet I do not think I could find a man more courteous than you, if I were of a mind to attach myself to any man. But I certainly do not expect you would want to undertake such a union with dishonor." The king replied that it was fitting, because of her pride and arrogance, that we remain together for as long as it pleases me. She answered, "I would choose to have more of my friends here, but since I can now do nothing, you must decide this matter, and I expect you to behave honorably towards me." The drinking continued throughout the evening, and long into the night the queen was so cheerful that no one noticed in her anything other than she thought well of the marriage. Finally, when Helgi was brought to bed, she was waiting there for him. The king had drunk so much that at once he fell down asleep on the bed. Taking advantage of his state, the queen stuck him with a sleep thorn. When the last of the men had left, the queen got up. She shaved off all his hair and smeared him with tar. Next, she took a leather sack made for sleeping and placed some clothes in it. After that, she grabbed hold of the king and stuffed him into the sack. Then she called her men and had them carry the king to the ships. The queen next awakened Helgi's men, telling them that their king had gone back to the ships because of a favorable wind and was planning to set sail. They jumped up, each one moving as fast as he could, but drunk and confused, they scarcely knew what to do. When the men arrived at the ships, the king was nowhere to be found. They did, however, see that a large sack was there. Curious about his contents, they decided to look while waiting for the king. They assumed that he would be coming soon later. When they untied the sack, they found their king shamefully tricked. The sleep thorn fell away and the king awoke. Though his dreams had not been pleasant, he was now in a vile temper regarding the queen. But about Queen Olaf there is more to be told. She spent the night gathering her men, and there was no lack of numbers. Meanwhile, King Helgi could not decide how to get back at her. When he and his men heard from the land the sound of trumpets and the blast of war horns, Helgi realized that it would be best to get away as quickly as possible. As it turned out, a fair wind was blowing at the time. King Helgi sailed home to his kingdom, bearing his dishonor and disgrace. He was filled with resentment about the outcome and often contemplated how to take vengeance on the queen. Okie dokie. So yeah, that's how most love stories start. Here we have Helgi, right? Who eventually will find his King Hrolf Kraki's father. He hears about this hard-headed woman who lives in Saxland. And that's basically Saxony in Germany. The story goes that she is one badass chick. And she wears, the dress of a man. She wears a chainmail and a breastplate. She carries a sword. She wears her helmet. She don't need no man. So what does Helgi say? Because he's an alpha dude. He's like, well, how about we just set sail, and when we make landfall, I'll just introduce myself to her. We'll make ourselves at home, and I'll propose the marriage right there at the feast. How does that sound? That was his plan. So yeah, she lies in wait. She's like, okay, I can't rouse my army because you got the drop on me. We'll have dinner. You'll propose this marriage, and I guess I'll have to put up with it. And then what does she do? She waits for him to have one too many horns. He goes to bed with her, as he stated, and as he passes out, she puts a sleep thorn in his ear. And this was considered a magical device that if you were to insert the thorn in the ear of the person, they would fall under this sleep, and they would only awake when the thorn was removed. So she sticks this thorn in his ear, and he's asleep. And then she stuffs him in this sack, has him taken to the ships, tells the men, oh yeah, your king just left. He said there's a good wind, so I guess, you'll be going now. They're drunk, so they rush down to the boat. They see a sack there. They untie it, and then the king comes out after the thorn falls from his ear. He wants to take revenge, but then he hears the war horns and realizes, okay, she's had enough time to gather her army. We better get while the getting's good. And they sail back, and that was King Helgi's embarrassment. Let's read the next section, King Helgi's vengeance. This is on 13. Queen Olaf remained now for a time in her kingdom. Her arrogance and her overbearing manner had never been greater. After the feast she had offered King Helgi, she kept a strong guard around her. News of their dealings spread far and wide throughout the different lands. Everyone thought it a flagrant misdeed to have mocked such a king in this way. Not long afterward, King Helgi again set sail in his ships. This time he headed towards Saxland, making for the queen's royal residence. The queen had a large force ready, but Helgi landed his ships in a hidden inlet. He told his men to wait for him there until the third day, and if he did not return, to go their own way. Helgi took with him 2 chests filled with gold and silver. He obtained some rags, which he used for outer clothing. He then made his way to the woods and hid the treasure there. Next, going toward the queen's hall, he met one of her slaves. He asked the man for news of the country. The thrall said the times were peaceful and good, and asked the stranger who he was. Helgi let on that he was a poor beggar. All the same, Helgi said, I found a large treasure in the forest, and it seems advisable for me to show you where it is. They went to the woods, and he showed the slave the treasure. The slave was much impressed by the value of the treasure, believing that good fortune had struck. How greedy is the queen? Asked the beggar. She is the greediest of women, replied the slave. Then this treasure would please her, said the beggar. Though I found it, she will think she owns it because it's on her land. Good fortune must not now be turned to bad, so I will not hide this wealth. The queen can decide on my share as she wishes, deciding what will suit me best. But will she take the trouble to come here to get the treasure? I'm sure she will, answered the slave, if it's done secretly. Here, said the beggar, is a necklace and a ring. These I will give to you if you succeed in persuading her to go alone in the woods. On the other hand, I will devise a plan if she becomes angry with you. After discussing the matter, they arrived at a bargain. The slave went home and told the queen that he had found a large cache of treasure in the woods. Enough, he said, to guarantee the happiness of many men. He asked her to come with him quickly to retrieve the wealth. She replied, if what you say is true, this story will make your fortune. If not, it will bring death to you. But since I've discovered you in the past to be reliable, I will trust in what you say. Then she showed just how greedy she was. So that no one else would know, she arranged the 2 of them would go alone in the dead of night. But when they came into the forest, Helgi was there waiting. He grabbed hold of the queen and told her that the meeting was an ideal opportunity to avenge his disgrace. The queen admitted that she behaved badly towards him. But now I wanted to make it all up to you, and you and I shall wed honorably. No, he said. You will not have that choice. You will come with me to the ships and remain there for as long as it pleases me. For my own pride's sake, I must take some vengeance on you after the ugly and shameful way you toyed with me. For now, she said, you are the one who will decide. The king then slept with the queen for many nights. Then the queen returned home. As just told, Helgi wreaked his vengeance on her, and now she became profoundly unhappy with her lot. King Helgi continued on his voyage, bringing war to others and acquiring fame. All right. So yeah, that's how Helgi got his revenge. He doesn't really sound like the same guy in the previous section, right? Like, here's this dope. He just shows up at this queen's residence. She's a queen, by the way, so she has like the ability, I guess, to, organize a country enough so that people follow her. And he just decides to walk into this hall and say, oh, hey, I'm Helgi, your future husband. Is the food ready yet? And then he just assumes that it's all going to go, hunky-dory. And then she tricks him. She gets him drunk, puts him in the sack. And then it's almost as if he gets a whole new education during that time. And he devises this clever plan. He says, oh, I'm a beggar now. Okay, so let's hide this treasure. Let's see if she'll come out and get it on her own because she's greedy. She's not going to tell anybody else there's a treasure out in the woods, which means she probably doesn't really have the loyalty of her men and her country if she has to sneak out to find gold in her own property. But anyway, she goes, and Helgi's there. And he grabs her and says, like, guess who? Yeah, that's right, it's Helgi. Daddy's back. Now I'm going to get revenge. She goes, okay, I guess we'll get married now. And he's like, oh, no. That offer has expired. So he basically just kind of, rapes her over many nights. And this was a disgrace for her. And she became profoundly unhappy. And after he was done with her, he continued on his voyage. So he was smart in how he caught her, but then he was stupid in letting her go. Because now that he refused to marry her and essentially raped her for several nights and then just cut her loose, she's still the queen of this country. If she goes back to her kinsman and says, like, guess what happened to me? That guy Helgi came back and he raped me. Maybe we should invade his place. It's like, yeah, maybe they will. Like, he lets her go and leaves himself open, to that revenge on the back end. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, but let's continue to the next section, and this is the girl Yrsa. On page 15, it says, after some time, Queen Olaf gave birth to a child. It was a girl. The queen treated the child with complete neglect. She had a dog named Yrsa. She called the little girl after it, so the child came to be named Yrsa. She was a beautiful child, but when she was 12 years old, she was sent to tend the herd. The girl was told only that she was the daughter of a poor farmer and his elderly wife. The deceit was possible because the queen had concealed her condition so well that only a few people knew that she had given birth. So matters continued until the girl was 13. Then King Helgi returned to Olaf's lands, and curious to know what happened there, he put on beggar's clothes. He saw a large herd in the forest tended by a young woman. She was so beautiful that he thought he had never seen a more lovely woman. He asked her name and inquired about her family and kinship. She answered, I'm the daughter of a poor man, and I'm called Yrsa. Your eyes are not those of a servant, he said, and suddenly feelings of love welled up in him. He said it would be proper for a beggar to marry her because she was a poor man's daughter. Although she asked him not to do this, he took her with him back to the ships and sailed home to his kingdom. When Queen of Olaf learned of what happened, she behaved deceitfully. In public, she pretended to have no knowledge of the situation. In her private thoughts, however, she calculated that these events would bring grief and dishonor to King Helgi, and that neither success nor joy would come of them. King Helgi married Yrsa and loved her very much. Oh boy. When I told you it was a Norse soap opera, I wasn't kidding, right? This is straight out of the soap opera. It's crazy. So King Helgi, being a dope, does this to Queen Olaf, right? And then Queen Olaf gets pregnant after King Helgi has his way with her. She gives birth to this girl. And she names this girl Yrsa after her dog. And literally has her live outside the house, tending to the herd, telling her that she was the daughter of some old woman and some farmer. So her mom, because of the nature of her birth, because she's the product of rape, keeps her around, but more or less disowns her. And then guess who comes back? Helgi, because he's an idiot. And he comes back and he does the same old shtick. He disguises himself as this beggar. And who's the first person he runs into? Oh, it's his daughter Yrsa. But he doesn't know it's his daughter. She's tending the herd and he sees this girl and she's got beautiful eyes. Wonder if he sees any resemblance. You think that might be a giveaway. And he decides to take her away now, which more or less looks like that's against her will. And King Helgi, marries his daughter. Queen Olaf now, she could be the bigger person and say, hey, listen, the history between you and I is pretty bad. Let's not make her life a living hell too. It's your daughter, okay? You can't do this. You're gonna literally marry your daughter and, you know, do things with her. Just let's call it good. She doesn't. She plays it off like, oh yeah, well, don't know anything about it. Whatever he wants to do is his business. I don't really care either way. So yeah, King Helgi scoops up his daughter and marries her and brings her back to Denmark. Let's move on. And we go to the segment of the ring. This is on page 16. And it's written, a ring owned by King Helgi was widely famed treasure. Both brothers wanted it, and so too did their sister Signy. King Hroar once paid a visit to the kingdom of his brother King Helgi, who prepared a magnificent feast in Hroar's honor. King Hroar said, between us you are the greater man. I have settled in Northumberland, and therefore am now willing to grant you my share of the kingdom that we own jointly. I will make this agreement if you will share with me some of your treasured possessions. I want the ring, the one that is the best treasure in your possession, and that both of us would like to own. Brother, said Helgi, after such a speech nothing else is fitting but that you should have the ring. King Hroar returned home to his kingdom and remained there in peace. Okay, so now I have to kind of give you a hint as to where this is going. For some reason, we have two brothers here, Hroar and Helgi, and Hroar decides that he is willing to grant him parts of his kingdom, shares of it, for what? A treasured possession, a ring, right? Does that sound like anything familiar? Like there's some, maybe there's a fellowship of this ring somewhere. All Hroar wanted was this ring. And Helgi said, you know what, brother? Sure. You know what? You're a good guy. You're better than me. It's yours. So Helgi gives up the ring. Now we'll read Jarl Hrolf claims King Hroar's ring. It's on page 16 as well. Next came the news that Jarl Seville had died and that his son Hrolf had then assumed rule. Hrolf was a cruel and exceptionally greedy man. His mother often described the ring owned by her brothers. To my mind, it would be proper, she said, if they remembered us with a grant of some form of wealth. We supported them when they were taking vengeance for our father, yet they have not rewarded us for our help either in respect to your father or in respect to me. Hrolf agreed. What you say is plain as day. The situation is disgraceful. I will go to them and find out what they are willing to do in order to satisfy our honor. Hrolf then set off to meet King Helgi. He demanded a third of the Danish kingdom of the Great Ring. He did not know that Hroar had the ring in his possession. Helgi said, you make such bold demands and act with arrogance. We won the kingdom with our courage, staking our lives on the outcome. We accepted the support of your father and of my foster father Regin. Other men also aided us. We will certainly reward you because of your kinship, that is, if you are willing to consent to our proposal. This kingdom has, however, cost me so much that I am by no means willing to lose it. Furthermore, King Hroar now has assumed ownership of the ring, and I doubt that it will be available to you. Hrolf left very dissatisfied. Next he sought out King Hroar, who received him with honor. Hrolf stayed with Hroar for a time. Once while sailing down the coast, they put in at a fjord. Hrolf said, it seems to me, kinsman, that it would be worthy of your honor if you placed the great ring under my control. By doing so, you will dignify our kinship. The king responded, I have given so much to get this ring that I will by no means part with it. Hrolf said, then you must allow me to look at it, as I am very curious to know whether the ring is as much a treasure as claimed. That is a small thing to do for you, said Hroar, and I will certainly let you look at it. He then produced the ring for Hrolf to see. For a while Hrolf studied the ring, declaring finally that there was no possibility of exaggeration when describing it. I've never seen a comparable treasure, and the reason you esteem the ring so highly is obvious. The best solution, it seems to me, is that neither of us, or for that matter anyone else, should enjoy it. He then threw the ring as far out as he could into the sea. King Hroar said, "You're a thoroughly odious man." He then ordered Hrock's foot chopped off and sent him back to his kingdom. Hrock soon recovered his health, and even the stump of his leg healed. Then he assembled the troops with the intention of avenging his shameful injury. He gathered a large force and arrived with stealth in Northumberland. At the time, King Hroar was feasting with only a few followers, and Hrock attacked at once. A hard-fought battle ensued, but the sides were uneven, and King Hroar was killed. Hrock finished his conquest of the kingdom and had himself given the title of king. Next, he asked to marry Ogun, the daughter of King Nordri and the wife of his uncle, King Hroar. King Nordri thus found himself thrust into a grim dilemma, especially because he was then an old man and hardly fit for fighting. He told his daughter Ogun how matters stood, stating that despite his age, he would not refuse to give battle if that was her wish. She answered with deep sorrow, "Of course this union is against my will. I see, however, that your life hangs in the balance, and so I will not reject him. But some delay must be arranged, for I am carrying a child, and this is the matter that must be attended to first. King Hroar is the father." The request was put to Hrock, who was willing to grant a delay if by doing so he could more easily secure both the kingdom and the marriage. It assumed to Hrock that he had greatly advanced himself in this journey, having brought down the downfall of a so famous and powerful king. Seizing the opportunity, Ogun sent messengers to King Helgi with instructions to tell him that she would not get into a bed with Hrock. That is, if the choice were hers and she was not being forced. The reason is that I am carrying King Hroar's child. The messengers set off and repeated her words just as they had been told. King Helgi responded that it was wisely said on her part, because I will avenge my brother Hroar. Hrock, however, suspected nothing. Okay, so the cycle begins anew, as we can see. All over the ring of power. Yeah, so for some reason, this ring is enough to get people to do some very dastardly things. And even King Hroar, who we see is portrayed as, the better of the men here than Hrock or Helgi, even he doesn't want to part with it. It's just a ring, right? So Signy, his sister, also tells of the story of this ring, that Helgi has this ring, and it is legit. I mean, that is the best ring ever made. And she says, you know what? We helped Helgi and Hroar avenge our father, Halfdan, from our uncle Frodi. And he really hasn't given us much anything, not in the way of respect or money. So, on behalf of myself and your late father, Jarl Seville, why don't you go as Jarl Hrock and talk to King Helgi and get us some payment, right? Get us a little bit of money, some status, because we're owed it. So Hrock says, you know what? I'm greedy like you, Mom. Well, I'll do that. He goes to Helgi. Helgi hears him out and says, yeah, kid, I don't think so. You know what? We killed King Frodi, our evil uncle. He got what was coming to him. A lot of people helped us out. Your dad, and you know what? We probably do owe you something, but I can't give you the ring because I gave it to Hroar. It's his now. He's not going to part with it, by the way. And maybe you could have some stake in some ownership of land I have, but apart from that, you can just piss off. So Hrock, says, okay, fine, see you, uncle. Goes to see his other uncle, Hroar, and he asks to see the ring if he can't have it. And what does he do? He figures, if you're not going to give this thing to me willingly, then I'm just going to throw it into the ocean so nobody can have it. And he casts the ring away. And okay, let's just say it. It's Lord of the Rings, right? Tolkien lifted the Lord of the Rings story of the Ring of Power from this story in Hrolf Kraki. This treasure drives men wild. It's all they want. And as we know, Isildur loses the ring, and it's lost for centuries. Just here, as Hrock throws away the golden ring of Hroar and Helgi, he says, you know what? If I can't have it, nobody can. And what does King Hroar do? Well, he has Hrock's foot chopped off. Why his foot? Who knows? And sends him back to his own kingdom. But then Jarl Hrock, his nephew, somehow is like a starfish and able to grow his limbs back, somehow grows his foot back from a stump, rallies his army, attacks his uncle King Hroar, and kills him, right? So the cycle begins anew. Hrock kills his uncle Hroar just like Hroar killed his uncle Frodi. Although Frodi got killed because it was over a matter of revenge for what they had done to Halfdan. Meanwhile, Hrock's murder is done for greed and for insult that his uncle gave him by chopping his foot off. But Helgi is still around. So we're going to move now to the next segment, Vengeance and King Hroar's son, Agner. This is on page 19. Queen Algan next gave birth to a son named Agner, who from early on was big and full of promise. When King Helgi heard this news, he gathered his forces and set out to fight Hrock. The battle that followed ended with Hrock's capture. King Helgi said to Hrock, "You are a thoroughly vile chieftain, but I will not kill you. Instead, it will shame you more to live with pain and torment." Then he had Hrock's legs and arms broken and sent him back to his kingdom. Hrock was utterly ruined. When Agner, Hroar's son, was 12 years old, men thought they had never seen a man his equal. He was foremost in all accomplishments, and he became a great warrior. He became so famous that when old tales are told, he is widely held to be the greatest of champions, past or present. Agner inquired about the location of the fjord into which Hrock had thrown the ring. Many people had searched for the ring, using all kinds of methods, but the ring was never found. Agner sailed his ship to the fjord, saying that it would be a great feat to snare the ring, if only someone knew the bearings. After being told where the ring had been thrown in the sea, Agner got ready and dived into the deep. He surfaced, but without the ring. He went down a second time, but again did not find the ring. After saying that it had been sought after carelessly, he went down a third time and came up with the ring. Agner gained widespread fame for his exploit. His reputation now exceeded his father's. King Helgi stayed at home in his kingdom during the winters, but in the summers he went out raiding. He became a famous man, more renowned than his father. He and Yrsa loved each other deeply. They had one son. He was named Hrolf, the one who later became a most worthy man. Okay, so here we have the story of how Helgi sought revenge on behalf of his brother Hroar. So Helgi takes his army and goes to meet Hrock over what he did to Hroar. And instead of killing him, he actually just dishonors him by breaking his arms and his legs and sending him to live in shame, which seems very unlike Helgi, but for whatever reason, that's what he decided. And Algan kept her childbirth secret all this time and gave birth, after this was all over, to Hroar's son, Agner. And as I said, it's possible that Agner is a pseudonym for Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar. And they said he became so famous that when old tales are told, he is widely held to be the greatest of champions, past or present. And in the Viking era, Ragnar Lothbrok, be it a fictional account or a historical account, is considered one of the most Vikings to ever live. But we see that he actually sails his ship to go find his father's lost ring. Maybe like the Arthurian legend, like the Lady in the Lake, right? The Lady in the Lake holds out the sword of Excalibur for the person worthy to wield it. And Agner has to dive 3 times into the lake, into the sea rather, the inlet, the fjord, and he finds it. And he goes on to become more famous than his father, Hroar. And then we find out that Helgi stays in his kingdom. He goes on raids in the summer, right? Because why not? And then he becomes more famous than Halfdan, and he and Yrsa, his daughter, who he doesn't know yet, again, more Norse soap opera, they have a son, and the son is the main guy here, King Hrolf Kraki. Okay, last segment. We read page 20, King Helgi and Queen Yrsa. Queen Olaf learned that King Helgi and Yrsa loved each other dearly and were content with their marriage. The news displeased her. She set out to pay them a visit. When she reached the lands, she sent word to Queen Yrsa, and the women met. Yrsa invited Olaf to accompany her home to the hall. Queen Olaf replied that she did not wish to do so. She explained that she had no honor to repay the King Helgi. Yrsa said, "You behaved shamefully to me when I was with you. Do you have anything to tell me about your family? Who are they? I suspect that I am not the daughter of a serving man and a common woman, as I was told." In reply, Olaf said, "It is likely that I can tell you something about your parentage. My main reason for coming here was to tell you what I know about it. But you are well content with your marriage?" "Yes," she replied, "and well I might be, because I am married to the most noble and most famous of kings." Your contentment may not be as secure as you think, said Olaf, for he is your father, and you are my daughter. Yrsa said, I am sure, the worst and cruelest of mothers. What you are telling me is so monstrous that it will never be forgotten. You have suffered, Olaf said, from Helgi's actions and my anger. Now I invite you to come home with me. You will receive honor and esteem, and I will behave toward you as best I can in every respect. Yrsa answered, I have no idea what that will bring, but I do know that I cannot stay here, aware as I am of the shame that darkens this place. She then went to King Helgi, telling him how oppressive her situation was. The king said, You have a cruel enough mother, but I want things to continue as they are now. But she argued that things could not continue as they were, and that from now on they must no longer live together. Yrsa then went to live with Queen Olaf and stayed in Saxland for a time. King Helgi suffered so deeply because of his wife's departure that grievously unhappy he took to his bed. No match was thought better than one with Yrsa, but kings were slow in asking for her hand. The main reason was the possibility that King Helgi would in the end come after her, enraged that she had married another man. Whoa, that's some heavy drama. So what happens here? We know Queen Olaf, being quite a nasty, vile woman that she is, she hears that King Helgi and Yrsa, her lover, rapist, and her daughter, the product of that rape, are living together in King Helgi's kingdom. And they're happy. And she's like, well, this is BS. I'm going to go spoil that right now. So she sets sail, and then she meets with her daughter. And her daughter suspects something. She's like, I don't think I was the daughter of some elderly woman and some poor begging farmer. Why don't you tell me, about your parentage and what's going on? And then she comes clean finally. And she only comes clean because she hears that some other woman, her daughter, is having more fun and enjoying life more than she is. So she's bitter. And she says, well, here's the story. I'm your mom, and King Helgi's your dad. Yeah. He came to my kingdom. He tricked me. He raped me. I tried to get free of him, but he came back, and he took you away. And so what does she say? She says, well, you know what? I treated you like garbage for the first half of your life, but how about you come live with me, right? So this is like the divorce, like who's going to get custody of the kids. And she says to Yrsa, I'll treat you much better than you were treated before, but you can't stay here with your dad being his wife. You can't do it. And Yrsa says, you're right. I don't really feel like either option's good, but I definitely can't stay here. So she tells Helgi, like, hey, Dad, this is messed up. I got to go. Sorry about everything. And then Helgi becomes distraught and climbs into bed and just, eats ice cream and watches TV because he's depressed that his daughter is now living with his, former lover, rape victim. Anyway, that is the ancestry and the immediate parentage of King Hrolf Kraki. Yeah, so that is, that's wild stuff, yeah. A lot goes on there. You've got, brother killing brother. You've got nephews killing uncles. You've got fathers raping queens and then marrying the daughters of that rape, and then nephews killing uncles again, and all sorts of just nonsense and just it literally is like Norse Viking soap opera. It should be one of those like daytime TV stories, the ancestry of King Hrolf Kraki. But anyway, we got that out of the way. That is the foundation of the saga of King Hrolf Kraki. There's more stories about the ancestry and the parentage, but I think that's good enough for now. You get the gist of it. So now for part 2, when we pick up, we'll get into King Hrolf Kraki's champions. We'll talk about the berserkers, which have a central part in this story, this saga, and how the berserkers are this cult of Odin. And they're these crazy-ass warrior men who go into battle naked as a jaybird with nothing but a shield and an axe, and just, stark raving mad lunatics that, call upon the god for energy and strength. And in some myths, they take upon the appearance of a wolf or a bear or a wild animal. And that's where we find the story of Bodvar Bjarki. But any event, I appreciate you sticking around for the ancestry and the parentage segment of King Hrolf Kraki. If you like this stuff, if you're digging the Norse literature series, give it a thumbs up. And if you're liking the King Hrolf Kraki saga and you want to share it with friends, family, anybody else, give it a share. And if you're liking the channel, of course, you can always use more subscribers. But in any event, we'll see you back for the Saga of Hrolf Kraki Part 2. And we'll get into the champion segment, as I said. And yeah, that one, that'll be the best part, in my opinion. I think the champions, when you learn about this history and you learn about Hrolf Kraki's 12 champions, you'll see the similarities between Hrolf Kraki and the Arthurian legend, his Knights of the Round Table. Right. So, as always, thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed it. And take it easy.